The research tells us that there is less men, and we've seen that, whether it be going to church, whether it be, even our Thursday morning Bible study at the middle school level. It's a 2-to-1 ratio when it comes to girls to boys.
Yeah, and that's the middle school, right?
That's the middle school. And so if we don't capture our man's heart and connect with them on a level that they want to be connected with, we're losing them in the church and as leaders in the home. And why is that important? Well, we're here to tell you that we know the statistics back us up when we say we need our men. We need our men in our homes. We need our men with our families. We need our men in the church. And so what are we going to do about that? Where are all the men? And
Rock Solid Families wants to thank Maxwell Construction for sponsoring the Rock Solid Families podcast. For over 30 years, Maxwell Construction has been a leader in turning dreams into realities, building schools, banks, restaurants, and many other commercial and public facilities. Maxwell Construction has made it their priority to not just build buildings, but to build into their community. So if you have any construction needs, call them at 812-537-2200. Welcome to Rock Solid Families Podcast. This is Merrill Hutchinson alongside my lovely wife, Linda Hutchinson. Hello, Linda. How are you?
I'm really good.
I don't know where you're going with that one, but...
Well, the title of this show is just intriguing me. Where are all the men?
Where are all the men?
It made me think of this song back in the 80s.
Guys, I'm pretty nervous about where this is going right now.
It's called It's Raining Men. Have you ever heard of that song? It's called by the Weather Girls.
I can definitely tell you I've never heard of that.
Oh, come on. I'm sure somebody out there has heard of this.
It's Raining Men?
It's Raining
I've
Men.
heard it's
Hallelujah.
Raining Cats and Dogs.
No, it's literally, it's Raining Men. Hallelujah. No?
No. Is it a Christian song?
No, not exactly. But it just made me think about that one. It's like, where are all the men? I'm like, well.
Yeah, so the title is Where Are All the Men? But really,
what are we talking about?
So at Rock Solid Families, I work with a lot of men, dads. Okay, that's where Strong Dads comes from as part of our work. And, this is no new conversation. Where are all the men in the church? Why have men sort of fallen off the table when it comes to a lot of healthy families and keeping marriages together?
Dads,
and so there's a book that was written several years back. It's called Why Men Hate Going to Church. And I happen to be reading that book. This is by David Morrow. And there really were a lot of parallels that start coming to me in my mind about why men are not, why they're leaving the home. All right, they're not as involved as they maybe once were, but also why they're not going to church. I think there's a lot of strong parallels there. And whether you agree with everything that's in the book or not, which there's plenty of things that I'm reading there and going, I could take it or leave that. But there's definitely plenty of statistical data to back up the idea that men are coming to church at a greater or lesser rate, that, men are not involved in the groups, men are not involved in volunteering as much at church. And so there's a lot of data to back that up.
Yeah. And, the research tells us that there is less men, and we've seen that, whether it be going to church, whether it be, even our Thursday morning Bible study at the middle school level. It's a 2-to-1 ratio when it comes to girls to boys.
Yeah, and that's the middle school, right?
That's the middle school. And so if we don't capture our man's heart and connect with them on a level that they want to be connected with, we're losing them in the church and as leaders in the home. And why is that important? Well, we're here to tell you that we know the statistics back us up when we say we need our men. We need our men in our homes. We need our men with our families. We need our men in the church. And so what are we going to do about that? Where are all the men, and how can we make a difference in connecting men back to the things that they need to be involved in?
Yeah. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to be talking a lot about men in marriage and relationship, along with men and church or not going to church. And the reason for that is because both are types of relationships. And when we understand why or what it takes to be in a relationship, I think we'll get a better understanding of what's happened to all the men. Okay, and then we're going to talk about, well, how could we address this? And I don't think we're going to walk out of there here at the end of the show with the absolute solution, because I think a lot of it is much bigger than that. But I think if we start to have these conversations in our home, that we can do much, much better than we currently are.
Yeah. But before we do that, we want to thank our sponsors. We want to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions and Maxwell Construction for their support of the Rock Solid Families podcast and also Rock Solid Families. And so, both of those organizations are a lot of men involved in the work, whether it be, digging holes and building rock walls to building, apartment buildings and, schools. So we know that these organizations believe that it's important that men are connected and men lead. And so we're excited to bring you this show.
Yeah. So, hon, let's go back to start with a little bit of our old psychology training. And back in our psychology training, there was Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Do you remember when we took psychology in college? That we were sharing books and comparing grades because, we were in college together. And
where are you going with this, Linda?
Do you remember the only education class, the only class that you got a higher grade than me?
Yes, I do. I do. And that was actually the psychology of sexuality. Yes. It just made me think about that because I remember sharing psychology books.
Guys,
I don't know where Linda's brain is today. She's first reigning men, and now she's bringing up the only one class that I beat her in. So I don't know where her brain is, but we're going to move past that.
At least we'll have some fun.
Let's get back to
You're
Maslow's
the one that titled it, Where Are All the Men?
I know, but you're taking it in every direction I never had a plan for. All right.
Anyway, back to your high.
Yeah, so let's go back to Maslow's work. And he essentially built a pyramid, and the pyramid has, at the base, and the base indicates that you have to have this. Everything rests on this, okay? And the first layer of the base is the physiological, or what we would talk about more, the physical needs, food, water, shelter, these kinds of things, okay? The next stack up is safety, which really still falls in the physical, okay? It falls in the physical where, I want to make sure that this is why we have, people leaving cities or crime-filled areas. It's just like, no, I don't feel safe there, okay?
Yeah. And why baby cries, their needs are not being met. They're scared. Or
The
they're
physical
hungry.
needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you get to the middle of the pyramid, and that's where Maslow really touches much more on emotional needs. And by the way, no matter who you are, male, female, it doesn't matter. Everybody has emotional needs. What is different is maybe how they're met. Okay. And so this involves how you feel loved, how you feel connected or belonged, how you feel valued, your esteem, self-esteem. Like, this is how you feel, okay? And so that's in the middle of the pyramid. And then the top of the pyramid is what we call self-actualization. And this is how you actually see yourself as compared, or relative to, I should say, God, the world, others, and what is your function there? And so this is really where God comes in. And that's why, you might say, well, God is the most important, but there's plenty of people who completely deny the existence of God and still live a life, okay? And so that's why it's at the top of the pyramid. And so just to be simple in our conversation today, I want to talk about the physical needs of a person, the emotional needs, and the spiritual needs, okay? Now, here's something that I think it's important for us to realize. When somebody's needs are not being met, they're not going to be in that position or that relationship for very long. Yeah. Okay. So, something very interesting. So I'll take this back to marriages. Many years ago, men, which divorce was much less frequent, but it was a man who would walk out on the marriage, okay? And typically, he would say that maybe his physical needs, and usually sexual needs, he would say those weren't being met. And then so he would go out and have an affair and that kind of thing. But do you know the rate of people seeking divorce now, men versus women?
Yeah. It's
the difference?
It's now 70-30. Women
70% of divorces are initiated by the woman, okay? But that's not one day she just wakes up and she says, I'm getting a divorce. What's happened is that now, over the last 30 years, we've had ladies out working and proving and indicating that they can provide for their physical needs. Yeah. They can make a great paycheck, and they can buy a house, and they can have that fundamental need of physical need taken care of. Yep. And so what they're doing now is women are now moving up to the next level of need, their emotional need, and they're going, I've got this physical stuff taken care of. And emotionally, I feel like we've been disconnected for the last 10 years, and I'm empty. And so that's what's initiating far more women going out than men. All right, because men are not putting as much of a need into the emotional side.
Yeah. So what does this do, Hun, to the whole idea of men in the church? How does that connect?
So I think it's important that we did have that first part of the conversation, because if we're saying, well, why are men in the church, or why are men leaving the church? Then you have to understand the hierarchy of needs. Like, you can't just say men just don't like it. You have to say, okay, guys, what need is not being met that makes me see that you don't want to be interested in this, okay? And when churches, if churches start to pursue this, or if a couple says, hey, maybe the wife goes to church and the husband is lagging behind, maybe he's not as interested, what kind of conversation can that couple have in making different moves to actually maybe invite him, or make it more inviting for him to want to be there, okay?
Yeah. So let's take physical, for example. Like, what does a man need? And obviously you're driving this because you're speaking from a personal point of view, and I'm a woman looking on the outside. What is it that men struggle with at church physically that we're not reaching them well?
Yeah. I want to be careful here, because we're going to be talking in a lot of generalizations, okay? And so not every man and not every woman fits exactly in this category, okay? So don't lose your mind when I say something, all right? But by and large, and this is why we started Strong Dads, the marketing and the push for my Strong Dads group is really after that good, and I'll say blue-collar guy, that guy who's out just getting dirty, doing his work, but he's a good guy, but he doesn't quite get all the family stuff or the church stuff, okay? And so the contention here, and this is a lot of what Why Men Hate Going to Church, why that book existed and actually sold very, very well, is that church, and honey, we've heard this before, has been extremely feminized really over the last 200 years. And what does it mean to be feminized? If you look at church function, by and large, the church function is you have a male, maybe two, who are in somewhat leadership positions, the pastor, the preacher, or whatever. But after that, the church is very much run by women. It's like when I worked at the elementary school. It's very much a female-dominated place. And so I used to come home and joke with you and say, sometimes I need to come home and just go down to my workshop and grab my hammer and just start hitting things. Because us men, if we are in a female-dominated area, we really start to go, what am I doing here? Because it just doesn't connect. It'd be no different than if I took a lady and took her up to a shop at the Indy 500 and let her just work on cars, and she'd be like, it was nice to see it for the first time, but that's about it. Good.
That's funny that you say that, because remember when we would do marriage retreats and we'd have males and females and we'd have equal numbers because it's, couples. And so I would be the one that's planning the agenda, and I'm always having an icebreaker game and, little talk time and music. And you're like, guys aren't going to like that. Guys aren't going to like that. No, they don't want to play games. They don't want to sing a bunch of songs.
Do an icebreaker and see how many kids each couple has, and the guys are like, honey, will you just go out and fill this paper out? I don't really want to do this.
But, you're right. Like, that appeals to the woman. And, let's face it, women are more the talkers. Women are more the readers. And so that is hard when that's what our church is made up a lot of.
Yeah. And so at some point, the man says, what need of mine is not being met? It could be a physical, it could be emotional. Like, okay, it's not being met. And am I being valued? Do I feel of value? A man wants to feel like he has something to give, right? And so, you know what? I'm not of much value to you. I'm not of much use to this. I think I'll go elsewhere. So it's not that men are just running for the sake of running. They're like, I just don't feel useful here.
Yeah,
right?
That's why a lot of times churches will connect with men to maybe work on projects. Maybe they're helping fix the roof, or maybe they're helping them cut the grass, or maybe them helping widows that are, in need of, winterization or something like that, where men feel like I am putting my faith into action, and that's how I worship. And so, we've got to help men meet those physical needs. That's why your Strong Dads has a workout component to it. You have Bible study, but half of it is getting up, getting sweaty, working out, and meeting those physical needs.
Yeah, and our talk is completely different.
Yes.
And I say that because, a lot of guys that are out working construction and they're more gruff because that's what it takes to be in there. We have sons in the military and that conversation is very gruff. And can you imagine going to a bunch of guys, that are fighting about and going, hey, could you quit using the F word? They'd be like, are you serious?
Not saying we're promoting the F word though.
No, not at all. But men speak, that's how their emotion comes out. And to sit there and try to make that the focus of what we have to clean up completely takes a man and says, okay, well, I don't fit here. I don't fit here. Yeah. All right. And so, a man, once he finds out where he fits, then he will actually start to alter. If he thinks that he has a value, he'll start to watch his mouth. He'll start to watch how he presents. But if he's like, I don't really feel any connectedness or value to this, so I'm going to be me. Yeah. And so I think there's so many areas, both in the marriage as well as in the church, that if we truly want more of men, then there are some things that we can do.
Yeah. So those are physical needs. Emotional needs would be the same kind of thing, that if the man doesn't feel if his needs are being met, and if he's being guilted or shamed, like, oh, you're less than a holy person, or you're a terrible person, a sinful person, that you don't go to church or you don't pray like me, we're not going to get our men there, you know? And I've talked to a lot of women who want their men to be the spiritual leaders in their home, and they're really hitting them over the head with the hammer, trying to get them to do that. And that's not the way to do it. You're not going to meet your husband's physical and emotional needs by guilting them or shaming them to come with you. I tell women this all the time. If that's important to you, then you do it first. You go to church, you pray, you read your Bible, not saying, oh, come over here and do this with me. You're not doing this with me, but doing it and saying, I value this. This is something that I would love to share with you, but I'm not going to guilt you over it. I'm going to just keep pursuing it for myself.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to wrap up with the idea here of how we start meeting those more specifically, okay? But the last one, and two, I want to address because it's the spiritual need, all right? And there are a lot of people that will say, well, my husband doesn't go to church, or these men don't go to church, so, they really don't have any relationship with God. And I will definitely push back on that because I know plenty of men, and I know even for myself, I feel far more connected to God when I'm outside and in his nature than I do at church. At church, I'm doing a procedural sort of thing. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that's not where I feel connected to God. Okay, where I feel connected to God. And you will hear this. I talk to hunters and fishermen all the time, and they will say, you know what? I don't even care if I catch anything. I just know I'm out there and it's peaceful and I'm good. And the number of guys I hear is, well, sometimes I just pray when I'm out there in the deer stand because that's where they see the magnitude of God's work and they go, wow, there is something bigger to me. And so what I'll say there is men oftentimes seek their spiritual fulfillment in different ways. And just because they're not always going to church or they're struggling with it, and by the way, I'm not saying we don't go to church, okay? We're going to try to figure out how we get there better to be more effective there, but don't cast them out to say, well, they're not a churchgoer, so they must not believe in God, because I have found that to be not true at all.
Well, and also when we're talking about spiritual needs, sometimes there's a barrier there between them and God because there is some childhood wounds, there is some trauma, there is some unresolved unforgiveness that has kept them from pursuing God or even wanting a relationship with God. So why don't you drill down or help your spouse drill down to the root of why is it I don't want to pray? Why is it I don't want to go to church? Is it because of some abuse in my past? Or maybe it's because I still harbor this resentment and unforgiveness towards somebody else. And so that's the bigger wound that we've got to take care of so that we would find that freedom and that peace that comes when we heal right.
You have to speak their language.
Yeah.
I remember I took a chemistry class once, and my chemistry professor for this particular class was a foreigner.
Yeah.
And his language was so broken relative to English that all of us people were starting to skip the class, skip the lecture, and they were like, I'm just going to try to figure this out in the lab.
Because you couldn't understand them.
And it didn't mean the chemistry wasn't good. It's just like you're not speaking my language. I don't understand it. So now I get even more frustrated hanging out there. And so I think that when we're at church, the language is not being spoken to men. All right. Remember, we went about a year and a half ago out to our friend's church out in Phoenix. And that church took it upon themselves to say, our target audience is going to be the male. And so all of their language, all of their signage, all of their video advertisement, everything had male language incorporated. And what's very interesting about that is women are not bothered by that. The women attend every bit as much, okay? But men are coming in groves. And so when we went to their youth activity, which had thousands, it was, I don't know, like 1,500 or 2,000 kids, the boys, the high school boys, and I'm not talking like, the wimpy little boys. I'm talking like the stud boys were just all over the place.
Yeah,
and
you're right.
that was because that language is being spoken to them.
So how do we get men into the church and then more committed to lead their family, So if we want to truly change and address this, we got to go back to the understanding of how do we meet their needs, okay? So here's a few ways that we've seen men walk back through the church doors.
Yeah, so I have 7 ways.
Okay.
7 things that we can do or approach differently so that we can start to be more inviting to get these men back in because we need them on the field playing.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the first one was the one I mentioned about stop attempting to drag them. Stop nagging them, stop guilt tripping them, stop blaming them. Keep inviting them, every once in a while. Don't keep it every week nagging, but let them know we want you to come. We'd love for you to come, but we're not going to guilt you and shame you. Men don't want to be told what to do. I found that the hard way.
Well, Yeah, because you are a type A personality who likes to be in control. And so when you do something, you right away just go in and just sort of, you assume that everybody wants to be controlled. And even in our marriage, we've had to talk like, hey, you're doing that project and that's fine, but don't step in my territory.
So if you've been listening to Rock Solid Families podcast for any length of time, you may have heard of our first gigantic fight when we were only a couple months married, and that was the blue pants story. But the blue pants started because I tried to get him to wear bright blue pants, and I was buying them even though he said no. And that was my attempt to try to control you and guilt you, because they were really on sale and a great deal, but you did not want to be told what to wear.
Well, and the pants were ugly.
They were very ugly. But I learned that the hard way, that that's not my job, and that just pushes you further away.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really an adult thing. Actually, you see about the age of 10, and that's about the age where people can start to do problem solving on their own. That's when in math, long division starts to be introduced. And when people start to have a level of success at problem solving, they want to figure out their own solutions. And so if you're constantly stepping in and saying to your man, hey, you need to start, hey, you should do this, these are major turnoffs. And so right away, the more you do it, the deeper his heels get into the ground.
By the way, I'm going to speak to the moms out there, because there's a lot of moms who listen to our podcasts who are doing this to their sons, their teenage sons, their young adult men. And it's time, Mom, that we step back and give them some freedom to make those decisions. They know what you want. They know what would be pleasing to you, but you're not going to get it the way you're going about it. And I'm guilty of that sometimes.
Okay, number 2. If I don't like to play guessing games. Hey, if you know the answer, go ahead and tell me. Like, we don't have to play a game with this. And so ask your man what he doesn't like about church, and then listen to him, okay? Because if you give him a good, fair, equal playing field to bring this out without judgment and to listen, then you're going to actually start to hear what emotional, physical, or spiritual need is not being met the way he would want. And so he might say stuff like, it's just boring. Like, I don't get it. Or,
it's too big.
It's too big.
Loud.
I'm not connected.
Yeah.
He is giving you glimpses of the emptiness that's in him. And remember, I'm not going to stay in a relationship where these physical, emotional, and spiritual needs are not being met. And so maybe he says, I don't know, the music in this church is just so dead. I don't get it. This is where there's got to be some coming together. Remember, the couple, the two shall become one. And this is hard because maybe the wife is absolutely in love with the church.
Yeah.
She
grew up there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been her church. But maybe he's pushing back, all right? And so this is a time where the two of you, remember, your marriage comes ahead of the church. Okay, it's God, right? And then it is you two. Right, and the church is a facilitating process.
It's the people,
right, that helps keep people together. But if the church is causing more harm than good, then find a church that works well.
And that is such an important point, because the church is not God. Okay, the church is made up of human beings who are imperfect, who different shapes and sizes, and so please do not equate the two. God, yes, should be number one, and if somebody looks at you and says it's me or God should be number one.
Yep.
But the church is just a group of people. And so that can be bigger, smaller, it can be louder, it can be softer, it could be, in Spanish. Or I have a Spanish speaking couple that is trying to find a church home, and they're trying to find their people, right?
Yep.
And it's hard because that's kind of not near them. And so you've got to find a place where you can call home the two of you.
Yeah. Maybe maybe you're a guy who, I just don't get this whole sitting in a pew and listening to old hymns. But maybe you're a guy who you're handy. You can build and you can remodel. Well, maybe you should be looking for a church that's got a mission-minded ministry where you are involved in Masters of Disasters and Habitat for Humanity and all these different things. We have a church in our area that's been locally slammed by preachers and others. And what they did is they said, we're going to grab men. And, you know, we are multiple generations now of church being removed from church, or from men being removed from church. And this church said, we can't let these guys sit out in the field any longer. And so they had become very male friendly. And so they have these sort of ministries where the guys are out doing,
fixing cars.
Yeah. And you know, an old traditional church person might go, oh my gosh, you know, like they're not really doing church. And I would tend to say, listen, there's only one way to God, and that is through Jesus. But there's lots of ways to Jesus. And we've got to get these guys to find a way to Jesus.
So you got to give him the freedom to move at his own pace too. So your pace is seldom going to be at his pace. So neither is right. It's just different. So I always use the analogy, if you wanted to have a running dog partner and you buy this puppy dog and then you put a leash around him and then you just drag him down the street to run with you, you're going to have to slow it down and you're going to have to train that dog, that puppy, to run with you first.
You just got to let him mature, right?
Yeah, exactly. Give it time. So you can't just force it. And that's what we're asking for the next one.
And you mentioned this a little bit earlier in the show, but I think this is a good place to insert this as well. If you and your husband are not running at the same pace, okay, let's say you've been in church a long time and you get it and you emotionally, physically, spiritually, you feel very connected, but maybe he's not. Don't stop going yourself, okay? You don't need to rub it in his nose, but don't stop going because that doesn't help either of you, all right? You continue to grow, but when you come home, you don't rub it in his face. You just talk about, hey, you know, it lifted me up today. It was good. And that he sees the health that you have in your life due to it, and that becomes attractive.
Yeah, it becomes more hypocritical if you're like, I don't know why you don't go, but then you don't go, and you say, because he doesn't go. That doesn't make sense. So you do what you think should be happening for your family, and hopefully he'll take your lead. Number 4 is don't judge him. You know, remember the speck in the story of, you know, not looking at the speck in someone else's eye when you got a gigantic plank in your own eye. And that's would be those hypocritical statements where you criticize him or judge him or condemn him, but you're not doing it for yourself. So don't judge.
Yeah, maybe you're acting very unloving towards him because he's not going to church, and so
might be pushing him further away.
Yeah, you've got the plank problem there.
Yeah.
So, you know, you just have to be really careful with that. He's not less than you because of where he is in his church attendance, all right? And we don't want his poor church attendance to turn into, well, I don't even know if I believe in God anymore, okay? Because as you talked about before, church is not God. Yeah. All right.
Don't compare your spouse to another person, especially in the church. You know, pointing out another man's goods or wrongs, you know, is just going to push your spouse or a man further away. So don't compare.
Yeah, that's that idea of, you know, your girlfriend, her husband goes to church all the time with her, and they go on marriage retreats, and man, essentially the message is, I wish you were more like him. Yeah. And so that's going to be even a greater rejection, that he's not enough, he's not sufficient. And so he will just fall apart, and you're going to become more resentful because your emotional needs are not going to be met at that time.
I hear that all the time, especially like if your dad was a strong spiritual leader. When you nag him and compare him to your spouse, to your dad, it doesn't make him want to come more. Yeah. He feels like he never can measure up.
Yeah.
The next one.
Number 6, let's talk about, we don't want this conversation to fall off the table.
Right.
Okay? Because that's like when we just finally, I give up, I'm never going to talk about it anymore. You'll even have these kinds of things with your kids where you bring up this topic and it right away goes into a bad place. Well, it doesn't mean the topic's not important. No. What we have to do is we have to allow the right opportunity for the topic to be approached, okay, and how we approach it. And so keep the communication going and keep it on the table, but figure out how you do it in a more subtle way. Yeah. You know, maybe it's just like, hey, when you're out hunting this morning, like, how was it to be out there? And just what were you thinking about when you're out there? Just so that he knows that he's not being judged, and you get a better glimpse at what he's actually doing with his spiritual growth and understanding. So keep it on the table.
Yeah, especially if you're an avoider. If you had this one conversation a year ago and it didn't go well, the avoider will be like, I'm not bringing it up again. Versus bringing up the conversation in a healthy, positive way and putting the invitation back on the table. I've actually had spouses who've said, well, they never asked, or they've not asked me. And it's like, well, they asked you 3 years ago.
Right.
That was supposed to be still open. They didn't know that. So please keep it fresh every once in a while. I'm not saying every week, but maybe once a month. Like, hey, did you change your mind? Are you interested? We got spaghetti dinner after church today. You want to come, or food truck rally, and something that might just spark it to be different.
Yeah. I think it's also it's helpful if you just say, hey, I don't know exactly where you are with that with this topic, but is there anything I can do for you? Okay, just so that you're not trying to take the reins out of his hands, and you're helping him with whatever the burden is. Okay, you're willing to be part of that playing team. So just offer, hey, is there anything I can help with?
Yeah, and you're also saying it's not my way or the highway. I'm willing to have conversation, because maybe they weren't willing to tell you last year that was just too big of a church, and that they have anxiety and they don't really want to walk into a 1,000-person church, but they're willing to go to that little church down on the corner that's got a couple hundred people if you're willing. And man, you'd be willing because you've been waiting for that for years. And the last one, hun, is prayer. Pray for the men in your life, whether it be your adult sons, whether it be your husband, whether it be your dad, whether it be your brother, whatever it is. Hun, I'll never forget one Christmas, you and I thought it'd be a good idea that we would buy my family, my siblings and my parents a Bible. And I remember praying about it and giving it to them and thinking, I don't know if that was a good idea. And it was 5 years later. 5 years later, I got a phone call one weekday morning from my brother who said, hey, do you remember when you bought me that Bible for Christmas? He's like, I've got it in my car and I'm heading to my first Bible study. And it was a coworker of his who had invited him to this men's study. And his friend said, got a Bible? Bring your Bible. And he dusted it off of the shelf. But I planted a seed. I didn't nag him. I didn't yell. I didn't, shame him. But when the time was right, and through a lot of prayer, God opened his heart, and now he's leading his family well. And it took a village, but if we pray for the Holy Spirit to move and to put people in his life, maybe it's not you, maybe it's somebody else, but somebody else puts seeds down and another person waters it. That's what the Bible says.
Yeah, and I want to dovetail into that. So the idea that, yes, we do want to pray for all of these men, because we know that God created them for a reason and with purpose in the family and elsewhere. But to help you, I'm going to encourage the women, pray for yourself. Pray for wisdom to know how to handle this man of yours. Pray for an understanding of how a man works, and stop trying to think that he should work more like you.
Yeah,
okay?
good point.
And so pray for your own wisdom and just your approach, because when you start to change your approach, you may get a very different response out of him. And so if you've been so frustrated for a long time because you're not getting him where you want him to go, you might want to think, I am approaching this in a not very good way.
Yeah, I love that, hon. I love that. So really, for all of us listening, whether it's the men that are listening or the women are listening, let's pray about that. Let's pray about what God has us to do. What is our next step? Whether we're the one that's inviting or we're the one that's resistant, what is God calling us to do? And it's not about what other people think or what other people look like or doing. It's about what God wants for you. He's not asking something from you. He wants something for you. And that's what we're looking for our families, for our churches. We want healthy communities. And that's what Rock Solid Families is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So our simple challenge, really, and it's simple from the idea of you got to open the door to communication here. And so see if you can get a conversation in just about where the two of you stand in your faith and your church and all of these things together, okay? Yeah. And see how well you can come together with an understanding of the two of you moving together, at least in the same direction, maybe not the same pace, but at least the same direction. Certain things maybe you can let go of, and maybe he can let go of. And so we can start moving this together, because the family wins, the marriage wins when the two of you become united and equally yoked in this walk.
Yeah. And if it's not a spouse we're talking about for you, whether, like I said, a brother or a friend or a parent, like plant those seeds and be patient, be kind, be respectful, and keep praying, and let God do what he does best.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we hope that this was helpful. We hope that there are a few things that maybe sparked some interest for you. And so if it didn't to you specifically, but you think of someone as you're hearing this, please share the show with them. We appreciate any sharing that we can get. So help us out with that. Gosh, you need any help, you can get information at rocksolidfamilies.org. Call our office at 812-576-7625. I think that's got it.
Hey, if you have a man in your life who, as we're listening to you're listening to this show, we're talking about the men who maybe have checked out. If you have a man in your life who hasn't checked out, who has been that leader in the home, tag him, share the show with them, and tell him, I am so thankful for you. Because that's what we're looking for. We got to encourage. That's why, hun, I just want to give a shout out to your strong dads doing real life, because you're going to the sites of where real men are living and worshiping in their work and in their attitude. And so you're starting to share those stories. And so if you know of other strong dads that you would like to see highlighted on the show, if you haven't checked out the Strong Dads podcast, do so, because I'm super excited just about really highlighting and encouraging those men and thanking them for just leading their family well.
Yeah. We need more and more of those mentors out there and feeding into their own family, especially their young boys, because those boys are going to be men at some point in time. So we really do. Today's show is really about just trying to lift men up and get them back on the team, because they are critical players in this walk.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to the Rock Solid Families podcast, building a stronger community, one family, one man at a time. Make it a great day.
Rock Solid Families wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions for sponsoring the Rock Solid Families podcast. Casey's has grown to be one of the largest and most unique garden centers and gift shops in the Cincinnati tri-state area. Whether you are looking to take on that next landscape project or simply add a little home decor to your house, Casey's has you covered. Located at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Call them today at 812-537-3800. Let Casey's help you add beauty to your home.